Welcome to my channel, Salted Revenge, where stories speak louder than words. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for the latest betrayals turned into brilliance. They called me a foundational piece. That was the phrase my CEO used when Forbes listed us as one of the top 10 healthcare startups to watch. Foundational, like a beam beneath polished floors, essential, but never seen. My name is Dana. I'm 34. Mother to a boy who loves strawberry oatmeal and T-Rex trivia. Former chief strategy officer to a company that sold compassion and practiced corrosion. I used to believe that loyalty earned you protection. But I've learned loyalty earns you silence, until you become inconvenient. The beige heels I wore the day I signed my offer letter still sit by my front door. They're scuffed now. Worn. A little uneven at the heel. But they still stand. And so do I. It started with a whisper, not a shout, a performance review rescheduled without notice, an investor meeting where I wasn't copied in, an intern who started sitting a little closer to the founder's corner. Her name was Kat. 25. Eager. Forgettable. Until she wasn't. I didn't panic. I observed. Observation is the first step of strategy, the quiet audit. But back then, I was still naive enough to believe strategy protected you from sabotage. When Milo got sick, the ground cracked. 7 years old, all freckles and questions. He'd been forgetting words. Shaking in his sleep. One Tuesday, I left work early, just once, to take him to the neurologist. That same evening, I received a calendar invite titled, Performance Alignment. No subject line. Just a block of time in a conference room I had booked for my own team. The cruelty wasn't in the meeting. It was in the familiarity. The same space where I'd mentored junior analysts, closed six-figure hospital partnerships, led strategy sprints on 3 hours of sleep, now it was the room where they'd align my performance. I wore the beige heels that day. The ones I bought after my first bonus. I had once run through rain in those shoes to close a deal before 9 a.m. I sat at the table in those heels while my boss, Mark, read bullet points from a paper he hadn't written. Lack of executive presence. Missed team stand-ups. Emotional availability in leadership. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I knew that words like emotional availability were code. Code for, we want someone less complicated. Code for, your child is making us uncomfortable. They didn't fire me. That would have been too bold, too messy. They suggested I take some time. Mark's voice was syrupy. His email afterward had a smiley face. We're all rooting for Milo, hope he feels better soon, smiley face. That smiley face still lives in my downloads folder. Every time I hover over delete, my fingers freeze. Some wounds deserve to remain, pixelated. I filed for temporary leave the next morning. Wrote it like a strategy doc. Clear. Polite. Chronological. I'll be back in 6 weeks. I'll train the intern to handle my deliverables. Yes, deliverables. I used the word deliverables in the same paragraph as my child is in the hospital. That was my first mistake. They didn't respond with concern. They responded with convenience. Kat, with her misspelled slides and syrupy laughter, was tagged in Slack 2 days later. At Kat, interim CSO, in the channel I built. No message. No call. Just a notification. My phone buzzed while I sat by Milo's bedside, watching his 4 drip. 1 drop. 2. Pause. The rhythm of slow survival. I didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't reply. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then turned it face down. There's a mirror in the hospital room, small, round, cold silver. Hospitals never put mirrors there for vanity. They put them there for reminders. You are still here, you are still real, you are still watching. I looked into that mirror and saw her. The woman they thought was gone. Dana, the strategist. The mother. The silent risk they forgot to count. Milo slept. Machines beeped. And I planned. Not with rage. With reason. I printed my offer letter that night, not the one with my salary, the one with the equity clause, the arbitration clause, the return policy. I reread every word. Then reread the Slack thread. They had no idea what they'd activated. I was no longer a foundational piece. I was the fault line. The woman in beige heels, walking away from the building she once held up, only to return and watch it collapse, one legal clause at a time. There's something that happens when a woman is erased in plain sight. Not fired. Not demoted. Just faded. Like ink on a whiteboard they never bothered to wipe, ghost marks where ideas used to live. I didn't announce my return. I let silence speak louder than any status update. My Slack status remained blank. My inbox untouched. And yet, I was watching. Milo stabilized, enough for short naps and short walks. Enough for me to trade hospital coffee for courtroom caffeine. I'd sit by his bedside with one hand on his chart, and the other scrolling through legal blogs, whistleblower forums, and corporate arbitration case studies. You'd be amazed what you can learn in the stillness between 4 beeps. Back at the office, Kat had found her rhythm. Or so she thought. Her posts were peppered with emojis, exclamations, and hollow cheer. Grateful to lead this amazing team, she wrote, attaching a slide I had designed months ago, the one with our phased partnerships strategy, color-coded by quarter. She removed the footer with my initials. But forgot to change the file name. It still read, Q3_CSO_DW_final.pptx. It wasn't rage I felt. It was recognition. The kind that creeps up on you not like a fire, but like mold. Quiet. Spreading. Undeniable. My name had become a ghost. But my fingerprints? Still there. Still smudging the glass. Mark, ever the performative puppet master, posted a photo on LinkedIn of their new leadership alignment offsite. I wasn't tagged. Of course not. But I was in the photo, blurry, in the corner, my framed values charter still hanging on the back wall. Accountability. Compassion. Clarity. Words I'd written after a particularly brutal week in the pediatric oncology department. Words now weaponized as backdrop. The shift began there. Not in public. Not in policy. But in posture. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was recording. Every slide Kat sent with metadata that traced back to me. Every meeting Mark held where my past strategy was renamed as Team Innovation. Every instance of quiet plagiarism, dressed up as progress. I collected them like pearls, one misstep at a time, threading them on an invisible string. I started a private Google Drive. One folder. No subfolders. Just dates, attachments, screenshots, and the soft sound of power returning. Revenge isn't built on emotion. It's built on pattern recognition. Milo started sleeping through the night. So I began waking before dawn. While the world slept, I read. Case law. Policy handbooks. Internal arbitration clauses. The equity clause in my contract, the one no one had paid attention to, stated that material role reassignment without due process triggered internal mediation. And mediation, per the employee charter I'd co-authored, required board awareness. They'd skipped every step. Left digital footprints everywhere. And I was sweeping them up, one Slack ping at a time. One morning, I walked past my mirror and noticed something strange. The beige heels were gone. Not stolen. Just moved, under the desk. Dust brushed off. Aligned. I hadn't touched them. But something in me had. The version of Dana who wore those heels wasn't waiting for permission anymore. She was positioning. Kat began to falter in meetings. Nothing obvious, just too many filler words, too many apologies. Her jokes didn't land the way mine had. Because they weren't rooted in scars. You can't lead from borrowed skin. Mark started replying late. Avoiding eye contact during board calls. He looked over his shoulder more often. Not because I was there, but because something was. The absence of my name had started to echo. And then came the HR check-in. An automated email asking me to update my return-to-work plan. I opened it slowly, like unfolding a letter from a past version of myself. I responded with one line, as per Section 3B of my contract, I am exercising my right to internal mediation regarding role reassignment. No emoji. No warmth. Just the clause. I pressed send. Then I waited. There's a kind of silence that feels like thunder underwater. That's the silence I lived in for 3 days. No replies. No Slack pings. Just watching. Then came the call. Not from Mark. From legal. Soft-voiced. Cautious. We'd like to set up a confidential conversation. I said yes, with a smile so still it cracked. Kat pinged me that evening. A single line, hey. Hope Milo's doing better. Would love to sync on handoffs. I didn't reply. Silence isn't empty. It's loaded. Instead, I updated my Google Drive. Added a new file. Labeled it, smiley face sync_request.pdf. By the end of the week, Mark had rescheduled the board's quarterly review. No reason given. But the agenda was updated, for the first time in a year, with my name listed under Legacy Strategic Assets. Legacy. As if I were dead. But I was breathing louder than ever, just not in the rooms they controlled. There was a mirror in every room of that office. I had once walked past them without looking. Now, I saw them for what they were, reflections of who they thought I'd never become. The shift wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. Quiet recalibration. One legal clause. One ignored message. One misused file at a time. They had tried to replace me. But I wasn't a placeholder. I was the blueprint. They thought silence meant surrender. But my silence was architecture. Every breath I didn't waste on defending myself became scaffolding. Every smile I didn't return was steel. I wasn't gone. I was under reconstruction. I stopped replying. To HR. To Kat. To Mark's lukewarm check-ins. My Slack profile stayed untouched, no green, no reply, no closure. Let them wonder. Let them project their own guilt onto the silence. That was the first disappearance, digital. The second was physical. I stopped showing up in all the expected places. The forums. The founder brunches. The alumni group texts. I became a ghost in the channels where I had once been a flame. They kept tagging me in legacy threads, old press features, team decks where my name still lived in the metadata. I didn't respond. Because ghosts don't knock. They haunt. Milo began walking again, slow, careful steps like he was retracing trust in his own body. I mirrored him in my own way. Every step I took in those quiet months was strategic. My days were filled with ritual, morning tea with legal transcripts, evening walks with audio notes of every clause violation I'd found. Sometimes I'd whisper case IDs under my breath while folding laundry. Case 98-04. Clause 2F breach. Arbitration precedent. I wasn't healing. I was coding. The beige heels remained under the desk, aligned, untouched. But every morning, I cleaned them with a soft cloth. Ritual, again. They weren't just shoes anymore. They were witness. Carriers of memory. The same way my scarf, the ivory one with the single wine stain from that 2021 investor dinner, became a kind of talisman. I never wore it. Just kept it in view. Proof that I had once been the woman who saved that deal with one sentence and a second glass of Cabernet. And no one had clapped then either. Kat was everywhere now. Podcasts. Panels. Her voice too high, too rehearsed. Her insights stolen from the strategy docs I'd built at 3 a.m. between fever checks and formula feeds. She used words like impact, alignment, and female leadership like badges she hadn't earned. I watched without blinking. And yet, I felt nothing. No jealousy. No rage. Just a cold understanding, she wasn't my enemy. She was a symptom. The real rot was deeper. The culture that mistook exhaustion for weakness. That saw caregiving as distraction. That praised me for being a superwoman right up until I needed to be human. I began tracking usage. Slide decks I'd created now recycled with new logos. Pitches I'd scripted, used line for line in VC meetings. I pulled receipts. Metadata. Audit logs. I knew how the system worked, I had helped build it. I knew what phrases triggered compliance flags. I knew what timestamps would be hard to erase. And I knew how many board members were legally required to be informed of arbitration proceedings. 3. Only 3. So I reached out to one. Quietly. Not with accusations. With questions. Soft, slow, surgical. A favor here. A clarification there. Just enough to make someone start reading. Just enough to make silence feel like risk. Meanwhile, I disappeared deeper. Stopped updating my LinkedIn. Left the founder Slack groups. Made my calendar a blank page. But the legal folder on my desktop? It grew. I renamed it scaffolding. There was one night, Milo asleep, rain tapping glass, where I almost caved. Almost wrote a long, aching message to Mark. Something human. Something weak. But I stopped. Because I remembered that day in the hospital. That mirror. That smiley face in his email. And I remembered that they hadn't paused for me. So why should I pause for them? Instead, I wrote a line in my journal. I am not missing. I am miscalculated. And under it, legacy is louder in silence. That weekend, I withdrew my name from a conference I had once dreamed of speaking at. Let Kat have the stage. Let her bask in lights she didn't wire. It didn't matter. I wasn't building for applause anymore. I was building for collapse. And collapse takes patience. There was a woman I used to be, eager, earnest, addicted to impact. That woman would have demanded answers. Would have begged to be seen. But she was gone now. Burned clean. In her place stood someone colder. Not cruel, just exact. A strategist with nothing left to prove, and everything to expose. The disappearance was never about absence. It was about reallocation. My attention, my energy, my name, all withdrawn like currency. Let them spend their reputation on borrowed glory. I was saving my balance sheet for demolition. And when the time came, I wouldn't knock on the door. I would pull the hinges. I returned without returning. No email. No announcement. No triumphant re-entry in the company group chat. Just a login, buried deep in the system, still active. A policy oversight. Or perhaps a mistake they didn't think mattered. I let the silence speak first. Mark didn't notice. Kat certainly didn't. But the system did. Each internal document I quietly accessed logged a timestamp. Each meeting calendar I opened left a footprint. Every forgotten clause I revisited bent like a thread, pulling taut with meaning. I wasn't breaking in. I was walking a path I had already paved. This wasn't revenge. This was accounting. Milo had returned to school, his hands still trembling slightly when he buttoned his jacket. I kissed the top of his curls and whispered, "We count everything now. Not love. Not time. Not what they took. We count receipts." The scarf, the wine-stained one, I wore it on my first visit back to the building. Not into the office. Just nearby. I watched Kat leave for lunch, laughing with the VP of Ops. She wore coral lipstick that bled at the corners. Lipstick that smudged onto the coffee cup, a cup with a logo I had designed in a strategy sprint that ran 16 hours without sleep. She didn't notice me. But the barista did. He paused. Tilted his head. "Dana?" I smiled. "Just passing through," I said. But I wasn't. I'd already filed my intent to mediate, quietly, through the clause I co-authored when we were just 10 employees in a single room with broken blinds. That clause stated that leadership reassignments without board consultation were subject to review. They had skipped the board. They had skipped me. But the software hadn't. I watched as internal dashboards began changing. First, Kat's job title, interim, then just strategy lead. Then her calendar, once triple booked with glowing introductions, now peppered with questions. Review sessions. Clarification requests. One meeting titled, Clarify Source, Q3 Presentation. I hadn't sent a single message. But they had started looking over their shoulders. The beige heels moved again, this time, into my closet. I didn't plan it. My hands reached for them one morning like instinct. Like muscle memory. They were still soft at the toe, the leather worn into my shape. Not just shoes, blueprints. I wore them as I walked into the HR building for the mediation hearing. Not the office. Not the team floor. Just the gray, windowless room where truth is weighed. Mark wasn't there. Kat wasn't either. Just legal. And a board representative I hadn't seen in 2 years, a woman with silver hair and a voice like flint. She asked questions slowly. My answers were printed, documented, highlighted. Timestamps. Access logs. File origins. Screenshots of Slack threads where Kat had pasted full strategy segments I'd authored. Uncredited. Unchanged. "We assumed you wouldn't return," legal said. I didn't flinch. "You assumed I wouldn't remember." Silence. Then the board rep turned one page of my file, just one, and said, "This is damning." She didn't say it with judgment. She said it with clarity. Like someone naming smoke just before the building catches fire. The mediation ended in silence. But it wasn't quiet. It echoed deep into legal corridors I had mapped years ago. And the echoes had started hitting walls. Back at home, I opened my laptop. Kat had posted a new LinkedIn update. Grateful for this growth journey, learning so much every day. No likes. No comments. Not even from Mark. I clicked Save as PDF. Labeled it, learning_journey_final. Added it to the folder. The next day, 2 people from the finance team viewed my profile. Then one from compliance. Then legal again. I didn't need to speak. I just needed to exist, in systems they thought I'd vacated. In policy they never read. In roles they thought were forgettable. But I wasn't gone. I was circling. The scarf I wore into mediation? I hung it on the back of my chair that night. A silent flag. Let them wonder if it meant surrender. Let them wonder if I was claiming my seat again. Because this return wasn't about sitting. It was about rebalancing. They thought I would scream. But I was teaching them the language of pressure. Soft. Focused. Strategic. One clause at a time. I didn't knock. I turned the handle. And the door? It was already unlocked. They didn't break all at once. Men like Mark don't shatter, they splinter. Tiny fractures behind every too-tight smile, behind every circling back email, behind the Friday donuts he never paid for but always took credit for. And Kat? She was already unraveling, not dramatically, but like a cheap scarf snagging on the questions she couldn't answer, threads fraying where confidence used to sit. It started quietly, with metrics, not mistakes. Not the kind that show up in headlines, but the kind that whisper panic in private Slack threads. Threads I was locked out of, technically, but the building still had ears. Systems remember. And people, they get sloppy when they think no one's watching. A friend from DevOps, the kind who always hated Mark's handshake, messaged me from a personal account. No pleasantries, just a single line and a screenshot. Thought you might want to see this. Partner performance Q3. Flatline. No growth since I left. The strategy Kat had tried to lead with wasn't a strategy, it was scaffolding. She used the bones I left behind, but forgot the blood that held it all together. I didn't smile. I documented. Mark started arriving late to meetings. The man who used to sip triple espresso shots and run 7 a.m. calls was now joining late, voice cracking from too much caffeine and not enough conviction. He blamed the market. Said hospitals were slow to adopt. But I knew the truth. The hospitals weren't hesitant, they were confused. Because no one had followed through on the roadmap I built, the one encoded with 5 acronyms that only I ever understood. Kat's confidence eroded slowly. Her voice thinner. Her replies longer, too long. Like someone trying to explain their way out of a lie they barely understood. She stopped using emojis. Stopped tagging wins. Because there weren't any left to tag. And I kept walking. Not through the office, but through the holes they left behind. Gaps in reporting. Decks missing slides. One investor call that collapsed midway because Kat skipped the section I used to deliver, the one that convinced skeptics in 5 minutes or less. You could feel it, like condensation on cold glass, the fog of doubt forming in quiet corners. Not accusations yet, just unease. And unease is the slowest, sharpest poison of all. Then, one afternoon, a Slack ping landed, not to me, but to legal, from a compliance manager I trained 3 years ago. Need clarification on internal promotion protocol. No documentation found for interim CSO assignment. That message echoed. Not loudly. But deeply. It meant the building was whispering back. Mark scheduled a last-minute leadership sync. I wasn't on the invite list. But someone, always someone, screenshotted the agenda and sent it to me. Line 3, strategic continuity concerns. Line 4, Dana Wells mediation, potential exposure. I saved it. Named the file line_4_ potential exposure.png. Another brick in my digital vault. I wasn't burning the house down. I was building the fireproof room underneath it. Kat emailed me. Twice. First, would love your thoughts on reconnecting. Second, just want to align on next steps, hope you're well. I didn't reply. Silence had become my signature, along with the scarf still draped over my old chair, waiting like a polite ghost with excellent memory. At the quarterly all-hands, the first one I hadn't attended in 4 years, Mark stumbled through his opening remarks. Someone coughed when he said the word transparency. When Kat took the mic, the projector froze. 3 long minutes of technical fumble. Long enough for everyone to remember who used to fix those things before they broke. They were cracking. And me? I was pressing record. The most symbolic fracture didn't come in a confrontation. It came in a whisper, the company newsletter. Usually fluff, easily ignored. But in this issue, under from the founder, was a line that caught everyone's eye. We owe everything to those who helped us build the bones. Even if they're no longer in the room, their fingerprints live in every line of code, every deck, every deal. Mark thought he was being gracious. What he didn't know was that those fingerprints? They were now evidence. I saved the quote. Highlighted it. Labeled it, founder_footprint acknowledgement.pdf. The unraveling wasn't theatrical. It was procedural. It was revenge by architecture. They had stripped me of title, access, and voice. But not memory. Not the clauses I had written. Not the woman who sat in silence counting missteps like beads on a string. It was happening. Not because I struck, but because I didn't have to. The scarf stayed on the chair. The heels in the closet. And the name they tried to delete? It kept echoing. One misstep at a time. They thought I was gone. That my silence was surrender. But silence, real silence, is never empty. It's layered. Structured. Intentional. And when built with precision, it becomes a trap. I didn't design revenge. I drafted policy. While Kat stumbled through presentations and Mark scrambled for investor reassurance, I read obsessively. Not fiction, not self-help. Contracts. Precedents. Arbitration filings. Every sentence in our employee charter. Every footnote in my own offer letter. Every amendment I'd forgotten I'd written, now reading like prophecy. People underestimate the permanence of paperwork. But ink, unlike memory, doesn't smudge when they try to forget you. It started with a clause, buried in Section 6C of the Equity Vesting Agreement. Any material change to executive role without documented performance review or prior written consent shall be considered grounds for internal arbitration. One clause. One oversight. They never conducted a proper review. Never obtained consent. They bypassed every protection. They thought my motherhood made me malleable. They forgot I co-wrote the rules. That week, I submitted my request for formal arbitration. Not through Mark. Not through HR, directly to the board's governance liaison. A quiet woman named Eliza, who once told me she respected how I documented everything. She replied within 10 minutes, acknowledged. Please allow 3 to 5 business days for committee review. No emojis. No exclamation marks. Just protocol. By the time Kat noticed I'd resurfaced in internal legal proceedings, it was too late. My digital trail had already bloomed into a paper garden. Screenshots. Slack logs. Email metadata. Version history on shared documents. I hadn't just been watching. I had been recording. Framing. Archiving. They tried to stay calm. Mark even posted a photo on LinkedIn about strong Q4 leadership alignment. But the comments told another story. Looking forward to Dana's next move. Where's the strategic legend herself? And under that, from a former investor I once pitched in an elevator in under 60 seconds, no Dana, no dollars. It got 143 likes. I saved the screenshot. Labeled it, no_Dana_no_dollars_LinkedIn.png. Internally, cracks widened. An HR partner I trained quietly flagged unusual executive transitions and lack of succession documentation. The word liability started showing up in internal threads. They had taken a shortcut. And now they were lost inside their own detour. I watched, still in pajamas and flats, sipping ginger tea while Milo built Lego cities beside me. He once asked if I missed work. I told him I hadn't left. I was just building a different kind of hospital. One where truth lives in files. And healing happens in silence. Then came the audit request. From an external consultancy hired by the board, quietly. I wasn't officially informed. But a friend in procurement forwarded the RFP, Operational Role Reassignment Risk and Equity Clause Assessment. My title. My trap. Mark tried to stall vague emails, late-night calls, but his voice had lost its volume. Because while he spent years crafting charisma, I had crafted compliance. And compliance is louder. Kat pinged me again. Said she admired my strength. Wanted to collaborate with transparency. I didn't reply. Just filed her message in the arbitration folder. Titled it, transparency_request_final draft.pdf. Days later, the board sent a formal invite to mediation. Location, downtown tower I once helped negotiate the lease for. Time, 10 a.m. Date, exactly 6 weeks after I took my temporary leave. I arrived 5 minutes early. Beige heels. Same scarf. No labeled folder, because sometimes, silence needs no title. Mark was already there. Jaw tight. Tie loose. His foot tapping, the tell of a man who's no longer holding the wheel. Kat didn't come. Eliza opened the room. Calm. Precise. Offered water. I declined. Mark reached to shake my hand. I looked at it, then at my folder. He withdrew. The mediation was clinical. Facts. Dates. Documentation. No tears. Just receipts. At one point Mark said, "This feels personal." I replied, "It's contractual." Even Eliza smiled. I laid out the evidence, emails, version histories, Slack logs, deleted footers. Every time my name was scrubbed, and every place it still echoed. Eliza nodded. We will process the findings and circle back with resolution in 5 business days. Mark looked smaller. Like a man made of pretense and PowerPoints dissolving under fluorescent light. As I left, I passed the office mirror. The one outside the executive room. For the first time in months, I looked into it. And the woman looking back? She wasn't a strategist. She wasn't a mother. She wasn't a survivor. She was a storm made of silence. And storms don't ask for permission. The room was colder than I remembered. Not by degrees, but by presence. Or absence. The long conference table, polished, smug, sat under overhead lights that hummed like secrets. I didn't need a welcome. I wasn't there to be welcomed. I was there to finish something they had started with a smiley face and a Slack ping. Mark arrived late. Of course. He always did when the power in the room wasn't his. His shoes echoed too loudly. His voice, too rehearsed. "Dana," he said, with that same tilt of the head he used during performance reviews. But this wasn't a review. It was a reckoning. I didn't stand. I didn't shake his hand. I opened the folder that had no name, and slid 1 page forward. Not aggressively. Just deliberately. A printed copy of the memo he sent to the board, the one stating that my role redundancy had been internally resolved. My signature wasn't on it. Because I'd never seen it. Until now. He stared at it like it might rearrange itself. Then looked at me. I said nothing. Because silence, by now, was louder than accusation. Across the room, Eliza cleared her throat. We've reviewed the evidence. And the board has reached a conclusion. Mark straightened his back. But his eyes betrayed him, flicking to the corners of the room like someone expecting escape. The reassignment was not in accordance with contractual obligations. Dana's claim for compensation and retroactive equity access will be honored in full. Eliza's voice was not cold. It was clinical. Surgical. Beautiful in its restraint. Mark blinked. Once. Twice. No words. Just a slow collapse of posture, like scaffolding realizing there's no building underneath. I closed the folder. I didn't smile. That would have made it petty. And this was poetry. Kat never showed. She was mentioned only once. as part of a developmental oversight in succession planning. A footnote in the failure. Nothing more. As I stood to leave, Mark reached again. I just hope we can, but I stopped. Looked down at my heels, the beige ones, worn smooth now. Then back at him. You don't get to hope, I said. And I walked out. Past the glass doors, past the elevator with its mirrored panels, past the receptionist who looked up like she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she had. Maybe they all had. Because I wasn't supposed to survive. I was supposed to dissolve quietly, politely. But I had rewritten the ending. Not with anger. With alignment. Not with fire. With facts. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. Because when the confrontation is clean, the silence that follows is thunder. The scarf is back on its hook. Not draped. Not tossed. Hung with care, like it knows it's done its part. Like a soldier returning to the closet after battle. And the heels? Still beige. Still scuffed. Still standing. But this time, I don't wear them out of habit. I choose them, like a woman selects her armor. Milo sleeps easier now. Not just because the treatments are over, but because I am here. Fully. Not watching the clock. Not checking Slack. Not splitting myself into something palatable. I pour him strawberry oatmeal and sit across the table like it's a boardroom. And when he tells me about dinosaurs or dreams or why the moon doesn't fall, I listen with the full weight of a woman who finally has space to listen. They wired the settlement into my account this morning. 7 digits. The final cost of their mistake, neatly transferred, quietly labeled. Equity reconciliation. A sterile phrase for something feral. Something that almost broke me. I stared at the email for a long time, not for the number, but for what it didn't say. No apology. No regret. Just the numbers. And that's fine. Because I didn't come for an apology. I came for acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, when built with precision, leaves a trail louder than any sorry ever could. Kat left the company last week. A soft exit, no fanfare. Her LinkedIn says open to work. She deleted most of her posts. Scrubbed the past like it never happened. But the internet remembers. The decks. The footers. The metadata. I don't chase her down. I don't reach out. I don't gloat. Because she was never the architect. She was just the tool. Mark announced his transition to advisor role in a 6-line internal memo. No farewell town hall. No legacy slideshow. Just one quiet line, effective immediately. And just like that, the man who once told me I was too emotionally inconsistent to lead couldn't even script his own goodbye. Poetic justice isn't loud. It doesn't need a crescendo. Sometimes, it's just a door that no longer opens. A calendar that no longer invites. A Slack channel where your name is no longer searched. And me? I didn't move on. I moved above. Not to escape, but to reclaim. I still live in Austin. Still in the same house. But something in me, maybe everything, has changed temperature. My mornings are slower. I stir my coffee. I smell the rain. I let my inbox rest until noon. And when I open it, it's not to read, it's to write. I've started drafting something. Not a memoir. Not revenge porn disguised as prose. Something smaller. Sharper. A handbook. For women like me. Women who were told to sit quietly while systems decided their worth. Women who trained their replacements. Who smiled through tears. Who nodded at feedback that was never about performance. A strategy document in stilettos. A playbook of policy, poise, and precision. No names. Just power. I call it the fault line handbook. Because that's what I was, wasn't I? A fault line. A quiet, unseen pressure point beneath their empire. Until I wasn't. Until I shifted. Until the building cracked from the base they forgot to measure. Sometimes I walk past my old office. The building looks the same, glass and gloss and exposed brick charm. But I know the ghost that lives in its server rooms. I know where the cracks still echo. A company can replace titles. But it can't replace memory. Not when the woman they erased archived everything. There's a new CSO now. I don't know her. But I hope she watches her mirror closely. I hope she learns the power of digital silence, of contractual boundaries, of screenshots that whisper when voices are ignored. I hope she walks in heels that aren't for decoration, but for direction. And if she ever finds herself pushed to the edge of convenience, I hope she remembers my name. Because sometimes, legacy isn't a statue or a speech. It's a policy they can't rewrite. It's a silence they can't survive. It's a woman who didn't scream, but built thunder anyway. So I tuck the scarf away. Wipe the dust from the mirror. Open the file titled finalclause.pdf just one last time. And then I close it. Because the story has been told. Not with noise, but with evidence. And evidence is eternal.